So let's talk a bit about thinking and doing. Thank you for all those insights on one-to-one. That's super helpful. I'll be stealing lots of those and make sure to attribute it to our Podpus community. For those of you who haven't listened to this week's podcast, we talked about this idea of thinking and doing. And I think the one thing to remember about this is not an either or. We don't want to be positioning this. I don't think it's helpful to position this as a versus. Oh, are you a thinker versus a doer? Because I think that starts to then put us in unhelpful boxes that are not useful. So I think don't think of this as a thinking versus doing. Kind of get rid of that. I think we're trying to get to an and. How can we adapt our approach when we need to and move between thinking and doing? Because I think all of our jobs need us to spend some time doing some thinking and some time where the bias is more towards doing an action. So I think it's more about going, well, where is your natural tendency? Where do you feel more comfortable? Having the self-awareness to know that and to spot that. So I am more naturally a thinker or a doer. And then recognizing at what point do I need to just adapt my approach enough so that I can, if you're a thinker, sometimes put on my doer hat, or if I'm a doer, sometimes just slow down and step back and become more of a thinker. So just for a second, just to describe these two different approaches to our work. When we are thinking, really good thinkers are very good at seeing different perspectives. So they can see different angles, good at options, good at scenario planning, good at exploring the art of the possible. So they can see lots of different options. Thinkers also value other people's perspectives. So because they're interested in thinking something through, they are interested in what other people think. So not because they value their own thinking, you also kind of think, well, I wonder what Lucy would think, or I wonder what Tom thinks. And you go away and you seek different points of view, which adds to your understanding and adds to your empathy. Also with thinkers, they are usually more comfortable, not always, to slow down, to spot when they perhaps need to stop. And they're happy to sit with a thought, and they're happy to sit and think things through. They enjoy usually that process of sort of pausing for thought, pressing pause. I'm going to mull this over. But I am a thinker. And one of my favorite things to say is, yeah, I'm going to go and think about, just let me have a think about that. I have to be pushed often to make a decision in the moment, because I will often say, I'm just going to have a think. And I say that to my partner all the time, and he gets really frustrated because he's like, that list of things you're thinking about is so long. When are you actually going to make a decision about the sofa or whatever it is we're trying to make a decision on? Because I'm always thinking about those things. So some really good pros of being a thinker. And we can imagine some of those pitfalls around procrastination, about maybe sometimes not experimenting quick enough. And there's some of the things that doers are really good at. So doers value a kind of action, have a real bias for action, and very good at progress versus perfection. So won't feel like they need all the pieces of the puzzle to be working in harmony or to have all of the exact answers before they get started. They're really good prototypers. They feel comfortable and confident prototyping. And also then you get the learning in the feedback loop, because you really only learn what works when something is kind of out in the world. So that's a really good thing about when we do stuff. It's only when we put stuff out that we can kind of get feedback in return. And then so you speed up that learning from the things that you're doing. Challenge sometimes with doers is sometimes the inevitable act first, think later. And maybe we've missed out on opportunities. Maybe we've not thought something through in enough depth for how important it is, because there is a bias for action. Maybe we are so task focused because that's what we enjoy doing, and that's naturally how we spend our time, that sometimes we miss doing that important work, or that really meaningful work, or taking on some of those knotty challenges that we all have as part of the work that we do. Yeah, that's interesting, Anya. I'm going to ask a question that's going to come to that in a second. So let me know now, which of these, if you sort of listening to those descriptions, do you feel like you are more of a thinker, more of a doer, Or do you sort of go, actually, I don't really feel like I skew one way or the other. I do see myself as kind of as a bit of both. So let me know just using the stars. If you can't use the stars, you can always use the chat. And to do the stars, it's just few options, annotate, stamp, and then star for anyone who's new to us. Few options, annotate, stamp, and then star. Doer, but you love to collaborate early on ideas. Great, Joe. Let's see. So we've got a bit of a mix so far for everybody.
Sarah, what's the one in the middle? The
this one.
The white. What's the white one? Yeah.
This is the one. If you think, I think I'm a bit of both.
Oh, I see.
You're thinking, like, if you're going, I can see how I'm a thinker and I'm a doer. I feel pretty balanced. I don't have that, like, I am naturally drawn to that thinker.
Okay.
As soon as I describe it, I sort of say, I am more of a thinker. Doesn't mean I can't do, but I am more of a thinker. Helen is definitely a doer. But I do think there are some people who just go, oh yeah, I don't necessarily identify, or one doesn't feel lots more familiar than the other to me. And there's a few of us here today saying that. Rebecca saying she's a thinker. Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you don't like making progress, exactly as Rebecca saying, or that you don't like achievement. My number one value is achievement, but I'm still a thinker. And this is that point about, this is why I always get a bit worried about any kind of typography that says you are this and you are only this, because of course you can be more than one thing at once. Of course you can be a thinker and have achievement as your number one value. Of course you can be a doer who really likes to seek other people's perspectives. It's more about just thinking that point around adapting, knowing some tools, some techniques, so that at times where we might think, is my thinking getting in my way? How could I move to doing to make some progress? Is my bias towards action becoming a bit unhelpful at this point? And do I need to slow down a bit? And can that be quite useful? So I think this is kind of links really to overall adaptability when we're trying to increase our adaptability. I'm interested now, I think this was Anya making this point. I'm just going to clear those drawings. As an organization, so the organization that you're in, do you think your organization has a bias towards thinkers, doers, or do you feel like it's balanced? Do you feel that all of those sort of approaches to work are appreciated? So kind of that point about, do you feel like maybe you're having to be something you're not because of your organizational context? Or do you feel like actually, no, it's okay, we've got thinkers, we've got doers, everyone feels like they can belong? Because I have definitely been in some organizations that have a tendency one way or the other when I was thinking about it at more kind of cultural level, which is actually not something we talked about on the podcast. Yeah, when I worked in Sainsbury's is, as you can imagine, retail is quite operational, and Sainsbury's is full of doers. It's full of doers who I mean, the rate of pace in terms of doers often get things done quite quickly, and the execution is incredible to be part of. But it can then be quite tricky as a thinker surrounded by doers who have a real bias towards going, get stuff done, what now, what next, quite short term often. That can be quite tricky. And I've worked in organizations and certainly worked with organizations that are very thinking based. And then that can also be frustrating because you're sort of going, okay, but we have got to stop thinking and start doing. Oh, Julia's a lawyer. Interesting. Let me just go back and read that properly. Very different people who work in different ways. Oh, that's interesting. So you work with lots of investigators who are doers because they're kind of, I assume they're kind of finding stuff out and they have to take lots of action to do that. Your organization, John, your organization is slow to make decisions, take actions, feels very thinky. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, previous company loved models and concepts and planning. Bias towards doers. Yeah, so it's just interesting. I was at a talk yesterday where someone talked about, if you can get a feel and a sense of the DNA of your organization, it can often help you understand how to be in that organization, how to adapt enough while still being yourself, which I think is a really important skill. And I think when I figured out, oh, Sainsbury's has a real bias towards, there are a lot of operational doers here. Okay, so they're going to get quite frustrated with me some of the time when I start to ask big why questions. Like I have a tendency to go, let's just remind ourselves, like, why are we, what's most important about this, and why is this going to be good for our customers? And so those kind of questions that naturally slow people down, we've talked about, I think, in this session before and on the podcast, those kind of big thinking questions slow things down, because you're not about moving forward, you're sort of reflecting back before you move forward. So it's just interesting to think about your organization. Is there kind of more of a tendency in your organization towards thinking or doing, and how does that fit with you? And then how can you adapt enough, but whilst not losing what makes you really good at what you do? Like I think I was valuable in Sainsbury's because I was a thinker, and I felt valued as somebody who brought some of those different skills. But I definitely had to recognize those moments where, it's not about strategic thinking, it's not about slowing down, we've got to just get some pace here to get people on board. So it's just about recognizing that and increasing your self-awareness. So what I thought we would do is have a practice at doing some of these things, where if in a moment you're thinking, I need to put my thinker hat on, or I need to put my doer hat on, what might we do? So I was like, let's just have a go together. So I'd love you to think now about a couple of things that might be on your to think list. And if you've got pen and paper, maybe jot them down. So this is things you just want to think about, nowhere near doing. So there's no action that I could see if I came and sat next to you. This is all happening in your head, all happening in your brain. So what do you want to just give some more thought to? So let me think of an example for us. What do I want to think about? Okay, so I've got one in terms of, I just want to think a bit more about what 2022 might look like for Amazing If. That's a really big thing to think about. I want to think a bit more about a HBR article that we've got planned. I feel like I just need to do some thinking before I can do any doing. And what else do I need to think about? We're also thinking a bit about, how can we help people visualize their squiggly careers? We actually have made a bit of progress on that, and we've sort of stalled a bit, and I feel like I need to do some thinking before I can get started again. So they're just some examples, some just things to think about, nothing to do as such. So Joe's saying, yeah, your plan for next year. So similar to me, that time of year, isn't it, where we just start to think about, what might happen, where might I go? So hopefully you've all got something. Right, next step. So let's do now, what we're going to do, I'm just going to get my phone ready to go. Reset. So we're going to do press pause, and we're going to spend 2 minutes thinking about one of those things. Just choose one. For some of you, this will feel super easy, super natural. For some of you, this is going to feel awkward. But what I would suggest we do is, if you want to, you can keep your camera on, or you can turn your camera off. But I'm just going to start a timer, 2 minutes. You can close your eyes, you can look out the window, you can look wherever. I'd probably turn my camera off if I was you, but it's completely up to you. I'll stay here just to stay here, because otherwise it could be a bit weird. So we're just not going to do anything for 2 minutes other than think. So I'll be back in 2 minutes. Off. Good thinking, everybody. Okay, everyone. That was 2 minutes. Let me know in chat how that 2 minutes felt. And did you manage to, sorry, Karina, I didn't see your message before I started thinking. Did people manage to not write things down? Ideally, you don't write things down, but for some people, I know that's incredibly difficult. So interesting, isn't it? Some people are like, it's really difficult. It felt really long, but you're a doer. It felt long. Yeah, Rebecca, I was relaxing into it by the end of the 2 minutes. At least you found that really hard. Steve did write things down. I think that's okay to get started. I think just think about when you're writing, try and write as a mind map if you can. But it is useful. Brilliant. Your mind was off and away. I love that description, Tracy. That's really good. Lucy showed me she did write things down. That's very funny. Need to write to keep your thoughts. That's a really good observation from people about writing. I would say perhaps challenge yourself to think about, we sort of think, oh, we need to write. That potentially could be a thinking trap. Almost like I can't think without writing. We definitely can all think without writing. It's just we're not used to, or it's something maybe we've not practiced. So perhaps have a go at just thinking again, like maybe once a week, doing that exercise for 2 minutes and just think and try to stay focused on the thing you're thinking about. So every time my mind wandered then, and it did wander in a few different directions, I kept coming back to, well, what do I think Amazing If could do, should do, might do in 2022? And I just kept coming back to that, And I think this is much easier if you thought about what's on your to think list before, because it gives you a focus for those 2 minutes. Amal saying just write things down. I didn't write anything down, just thinking. Brilliant. Yeah, natural for your thoughts to go away. For those of you who are good at this, and I am not, this is essentially a bit like mindfulness, but we're trying to be mindful about the things you need to think about for work. So we've sort of made it a bit more specific. Yeah, you wanted to write a mind map. You could try combining, experiment with what this looks like for you. So how about doing, you might feel better about this, 2 minutes of thinking without writing anything down, and then 2 minutes where you can write things down in a mind map. So you know that the writing down is coming, and that might make you feel a bit more relaxed about the thinking in the first place. Best thought when you're swimming. Yeah, I always find I'm best thoughts when I'm walking. Kayla, swimming's good as well. I used to swim a bit more when I was pregnant, but I don't really swim now. Write things down, close out the topic. Yeah, okay, that rumination, which is unhelpful, Steve, it helps you. The writing does help your thinking. I'd still encourage people to experiment with the no writing, just see what that does for you. Okay, cool. Good bit of practice. We've all practiced doing a bit of thinking. The other thing to think about, think now about who is the best thinker you know. You will work with someone, maybe the best thinker you know is you. And let me know in chat now, what kinds of questions would that thinker ask you if they were spending time with you? So if you're spending time with the best thinker you know, what sorts of questions do they tend to ask? Put yourself in that person's shoes for a second. Imagine you're having a conversation with them. What are the sort of things they will often say? What sorts of questions? I described one earlier where I'll often say to somebody, you know, like, remind me kind of the why. What's the purpose? Remind me of like the objective. That I always find that. Yeah, so Corinne said, yeah, the same. I always thinkers want to know, you want to know your objective because then it helps you to think something through. What are we trying to achieve? Yeah. So like, what are we trying to achieve? What really matters to us here? What does success look like? How does this impact our current situation? Brilliant. Pros and cons. Options. Yeah, brilliant. Sorry, I can't see your name on Zoom, but that's a great one. Oh, it's Katie. Sorry, I can now, Katie. Great one. Thinkers will often say, oh, what are your options? What have you explored so far? What are the things that you've thought about? That they'll encourage you to zoom out. We've talked before about zoom out versus zoom in thinking. Thinkers will often help with zoom out. Have you thought about this? Who else have you talked to? Often very open. Love that one, Anya. What aren't we considering? Great question. What aren't we considering? Like, what have we missed? If you are a thinker like me, worth knowing that there's quite a lot of evidence that when we ask why questions versus what questions, why questions can sometimes feel more confrontational. Depends on who like the trust you've got in your team and maybe who you're talking to. But if you can imagine if I said, well, why is this important? There's a risk that feels confrontational versus what's our objective with this project? Feels maybe a bit more, maybe feels a bit easier. Maybe if you're saying, what are others doing? That feels like, that feels like something that's kind of okay to say. So just watch out. I've had that feedback before, and I've also read some interesting research from Tasha Eurich about this. Why questions can have a negative impact. So just maybe sometimes think about what before why. If you're in a very safe environment, sometimes why is fine. People don't mind. So worth putting yourself in thinkers' shoes. For all of those thinkers out there like me who sometimes get stuck and don't make progress, I find this really, really helpful. And if you've listened to podcasts or read the pod sheet, we've talked about this before. So this is the idea of action-its, of where you take Post-its, and this does work best if you actually use Post-its. And on each Post-it, you write down one action. So you're only allowed one action per Post-it, and put them somewhere really visible. That's sort of step one. Step two is every time you take one of those actions, you move it to somewhere different in your room. You could use something like Miro, which is Miro, which does this online if you wanted to. There's something about being able to visualize this that is quite helpful. And there are like Trello and those kind of things that's also that can also be helpful, like Karina is saying. But I think if you are getting stuck, write down all of the small actions, and then as you take them, and keep them really visible in front of you, as you take them, move them so that you start to get some momentum of seeing the progress you're making. So I do this. So for example, here's a Post-it note from in front of me right now. Every time I feel like I'm stuck or I'm stalling, I keep that Post-it note when I've done something, and I will put it somewhere different. I did this in particular at the start of the pandemic, where I was feeling overwhelmed, a lot to think about, a lot that we could do, and you feel like you're going around in circles a bit. And so I think just this process of them moving these just helps to give us a bit of momentum, and also it focuses on, we know that we've got a task to do to go from kind of one to the other. So just think about action-its. It can be a really helpful way to get started if you feel stuck and if you feel like I need to put my doer hat on, but I'm not quite sure where to start. The other thing that can be helpful if you need to be a bit more of a doer is time blocking. So give yourself space to think, but limit that space to think. So you might go, okay, well, I'm going to give myself until the end of Thursday to figure out something. Maybe it's not a really big thing. But then after that, at that point, I've then got to start taking action. I find this really helpful. And Helen helps me with this sometimes. She'll sort of go, okay, Sarah, you've got until X, and then you've got to start taking action, or we've got to start making decisions, because it's not big enough to think about past that point. And sometimes those things you want to think about that much, sometimes you want to think about that much, but not all projects or tasks are equal in terms of the thinking-doing relationship. So I find that quite helpful as well. Last point, and then I'll let you all go off to your Thursdays, is just remember to challenge yourself on what time well spent looks like. If you're a thinker, sometimes we think time well spent is just lots and lots of time thinking. Sometimes if you're a doer, you can get stuck in time well spent is lots of tasks on our to-do list. Just make sure that we recognize that time well spent is often being able to adapt, but also to balance both of those things. Sometimes the best thing you can do is go for a walk for half an hour and think. Sometimes the best thing you could do is prototype and take one action right now in the next half an hour. So I think just challenge yourself that if you sometimes fall into the trap of what feels comfortable, because sometimes trying on some of these other hats feels more uncomfortable, and that's time really well spent. So I hope that's been helpful, everybody. I'm desperately trying to remember what next week's podcast is on. Maybe it's one-to-ones. Maybe that is the next one that we're doing. It's that